The highly anticipated truce between Israel and Hamas is now underway. This is the scene live looking over Gaza from southern Israel. A 4-day temporary ceasefire appears to be holding ahead of an anticipated hostage-prisoner swap later today. It follows weeks of the most intense fighting in the Israeli-Hamas conflict. Now, after such major destruction on the Strip, it's hardly a return to normality for the people of Gaza, but this pause in hostilities is allowing some now to move about with relative freedom.
After weeks under bombardment, people are back on the streets across the Gaza Strip. Like here in Khan Yunis in the south, the 4-day truce may be fragile, but even a short break in fighting is welcome.
We look at the truce as a way to breathe after 45 or 48 days of suffering for us Gazans. I'm from Gaza City and I was displaced to Rafah. I hope the truce is taking effect in all of Gaza Strip in order to see my demolished house and what's left of it.
Just like Khaled, many Palestinians who fled southwards have been hoping to use the lull in fighting to return to their homes in the north. But Israeli planes have dropped leaflets warning against that.
I don't think we can go back to Gaza City at this moment because of that announcement from the Israeli army. They are forbidding the displaced living in the south from heading north.
At the Rafah crossing on Egypt-Gaza border, 8 trucks have been entering the territory. This was a key component of the truce, and they'll be bringing much-needed fuel and food supplies for as long as the ceasefire lasts.
We had a lot of losses. This will let people breathe, move, eat, and drink, because the situation is difficult and all residents from the north are in Rafah without food and water. I hope it's a chance for people to live and move around, and we wish it's an introduction for a permanent truce.
Israeli armored vehicles have been filmed heading away from the territory. But Israel's military has warned that its troops are going nowhere and that the war against Hamas is not over.
Well, for Gaza's 2 million plus residents, the truce brings some hope of a respite from weeks of sustained Israeli bombardment and shortages of basic supplies. Now, as we've heard, fuel tankers and aid trucks have begun entering the Gaza Strip from Egypt through the Rafah crossing. Egypt says 130,000 litres of diesel and 4 trucks of gas will be delivered daily to Gaza, as well as 200 trucks of other aid. Now, the Israeli blockade of fuel has made it virtually impossible for hospitals and other basic services to operate inside the territory. Well, for more, let's speak now to journalist Karim El-Gouari, who joins us from Cairo. Karim, thanks for joining us on DW News. So what is the latest that you can tell us about the situation at the Rafah border crossing?
Well, Egyptian authorities says that the agreement is that over the next 4 days, 130,000 liters of diesel and gas will cross the Strip. The need on the other side to just run the basic things in Gaza is about double the amount, but that is what's allowed for this next 4 days. They will allow 200 trucks a day with relief aid. The first fuel trucks already went over this morning, and we are expecting also that about 100 Palestinian injured people will cross over to be treated in Egyptian hospitals. The first 20 of them already entered Egypt this morning since the truce.
Now, Karim, you've mentioned fuel there, but what kind of supplies are also being delivered apart from fuel?
Fuel, very important. Cooking gas, for the first time since 7 weeks that they can get cooking gas. Of course, like other things like water urgently needed, canned food, tents, and other medical supplies.
All right, OK. Now, tell us about the urgency in Gaza for this material?
Well, we have a cameraman who's working for us here in Cairo and in the southern Gaza Strip, and he sent us pictures yesterday. And there's basically three things that are urgently needed. One of them is electricity and fuel. He sent us pictures how people are like the car batteries are basically the essential supplies in Gaza right now. People charging their phones and charging their power banks with car batteries. And what's the car batteries for the energy supplies are the donkeys for transport. Most of the goods and most of the persons who are transported right now are transported by donkey carts because also no petrol available. And the last big issue is water. They're saying like the water is not fit for drinking they're having there, and also not enough for the basic hygiene. One woman said to us that once in 2 weeks, she's able to take a shower right now.
Karim, what does this first day of this pause in fighting mean for Palestinians?
Well, you can see big relief. The pictures we can see out there is for the first time children playing on the streets, people going out and about without fear. Of course, lots of people trying to get to their houses that were destroyed also partially in the southern Gaza Strip, trying to get out basic needs they have from their houses. And one of the problems is, of course, that people are doing the same thing and trying to get into their houses in the northern Gaza Strip, which the Israeli army has forbidden. And that right now is, I think, the biggest point of friction. This border the Israelis drew between the northern and the southern Gaza Strip, that is a friction point that might actually even endanger the ceasefire at all.
Thank you, Karim. Journalist Karim El-Gouari in Cairo. Well, for the families of those hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, the past few weeks have been riven with despair and trauma. Now the truce could see some of them safely returned at last.
After weeks of waiting, the families of hostages hope their loved ones will come home soon.
I want to hope. I hope that it's going to happen. We've been on such a roller coaster for certainly the past week, but since October 7th, between despair and trauma and hope, I just want to see the children come back.
The Hamas terror group has agreed to release 50 civilian women and children, of which 13 are to be released in the first batch on Friday. In exchange, Israel is set to release 150 Palestinian prisoners, mostly females and teenage males, over the course of the truce. The deal, mediated by Qatar, also includes a 4-day pause in fighting in both the north and south of the Gaza Strip, as well as increased humanitarian aid. Even though the agreement is considered a breakthrough, both sides have remained cautious about saying too much before it materializes.
Based on current circumstances with the start of this truce, our main hope is that this humanitarian truce will give us all the opportunity to look into the bigger task, which is to implement a permanent truce and achieve long-lasting peace.
Efforts are being made to extend the truce beyond the 4-day period, but Israel insists it will resume its military operation in Gaza until it has eradicated Hamas.
Let's cross over to Mike Martin now. He's a former British Army officer and senior fellow now in the Department of War Studies at King's College, London. Mike, the ceasefire has begun. How fragile is it? What should we be watching out for?
It's very fragile. The thing that you need to look out for are effectively spoilers to the deal. So these are people who weren't included in the deal. And they might be people within Hamas, so different factions within Hamas. Hamas obviously has a cellular structure, so it's not like an army with direct command and control. And also other factions like Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they haven't been mentioned at all, so I don't even know whether they're included in the deal. And they hold their own hostages, and they may also wish to scupper the deal. So those are the things that we need to keep an eye on.
What about what's happening on the ground there in the Gaza Strip? Is the Israeli military staying there during this pause in the fighting, or are they expected to actually pull some of their troops out for now?
No, they are everyone's staying in position. It is literally stop firing, even if you are, a couple of 100 meters away from people that you've been firing at before 7 o'clock local time. The one difference is, and this was built into the deal, Hamas insisted as part of the deal that the Israelis would stop overflights of the Gaza Strip so that they were able to move the prisoners without giving away their military positions or perhaps where the other prisoners were. And that is part of the deal. So Israel won't be, while the deal is on, while the prisoners are being moved, won't be overflying, I think, the northern part of the Gaza Strip.
Okay, we're looking at an exchange of hostages and prisoners coming up. That's supposed to start happening this afternoon. Walk us through the steps involved in that exchange, the way that it's set up in this deal. It must be quite complicated.
It's hugely complicated. The main issue is trust. Neither side trusts each other. So even if accidents happen, someone's weapon goes off, the problem is that the other side will assume that they're attacking, and then the ceasefire will be broken. Both sides will need to bring prisoners to an exchange point, and one assumes that will be on the border of the Gaza Strip. For the Israelis, that's fairly easy, but for Hamas, they've got these prisoners dispersed. They're likely to be underground, and they need to move them. We just spoke about Israel overflying. They need to move them to the exchange point without Israel knowing where they've come from. And when they get to that exchange point, both sides will want to secure their side of it, and both sides will then set themselves up with a distance in between them where they can show each other the prisoners, and so that they can then exchange them. It's horrendously complicated and fraught with potential issues, both accidents and some of the spoilers that we spoke about earlier.
So a complex deal we're talking about here. It was weeks in the making, a lot of negotiations. Those negotiations took place in Doha, the capital of Qatar. Talk to us about the role of Qatar in brokering this deal, Mike. They're playing an essential role, aren't they?
Yeah, I think really it comes back to trust, Terry. And the Qataris really, at the end of the day, were the only side, the only actors really that both sides could trust enough to get this deal over the line. Obviously, the Qataris host at times part of the Hamas leadership, but the Qataris have also over the preceding years built up a good enough relationship with the Israelis that they can act as a mediator. And I think actually we can see this is a role that the Qataris see themselves taking on. They've played a few other roles like this in Libya and in Syria at a much lower level. And I think this is a role that they see for themselves in the region and on the world stage.
Mike, thank you very much for your analysis there. That was Mike Martin of King's College London. Well, with me here in the studio is our Middle East analyst, Shaarosanis. So, Shani, we're now into the ceasefire. It has begun. It's supposed to go on for 4 days. At least that's the plan right now. It could be extended, we understand. But what are you expecting to happen when the ceasefire ends?
Well, first of all, it depends on when it ends. I mean, if this is going to last only for 4 days, it's going to be much easier for Israeli IDF forces, the military, to regain momentum, to go back. They still have some parts of the northern part of the Strip. They say that they still need to clear out from terror, what they say, terrorists of Hamas. And then we will see them trying definitely to go into the southern part of the Strip, where the main goal is Khan Yunis. This is where Hamas's stronghold is, where lots of the leaders are coming from. That will happen if this only lasts for 4 days. Good chances, though, this won't last only for 4 days. We've already seen yesterday there was a bit of a delay. Some of it is considered to be part of Hamas's psychological warfare or some manipulations that they're trying to pull. They might try to do it again because there is a scheme that is agreed upon, a formula, which says that for every 10 days that Hamas is willing to provide or hostages that Hamas is willing to release, Israel is giving 24 hours more of ceasefire. What if Hamas comes to Israel and says, actually, we only have 8? What's now? I think it's going to be very hard for the Israeli leadership, with the big pressure we see from the public, for the release of the hostages to say, well, actually, that's not good enough. We're breaking off contact. So there is a chance that Hamas will try to leverage this hostage deal formula for furthering, to extend the ceasefire more and more. And then by that time, what Hamas is hoping to achieve within 10 days, maybe even longer, international pressure on Israel will be so huge. It's going to be very hard for it to go back into fighting. The world, in the meantime, will see the mass devastation in Gaza. It will see the real numbers of casualties. As high as it is right now, there's still many, bodies buried under the rubble. It's going to be very hard for Israel. Hamas hopes, at the end of it, to go back to what it's planning to do right now.
You mentioned international pressure. There has been tremendous international pressure on Israel to show restraint in Gaza. Pressure has been mounting on Israel to introduce at least a temporary ceasefire. Now we have that. How much of a factor is international pressure on Israel in making this happen?
Well, so far it was huge, and Israel played on it. They knew that the world wants to bring more humanitarian aid into Gaza, and they said, well, OK, we're talking humanitarian needs. Our humanitarian need is to have our hostages released, and we're going to use this card. This is our leverage. However, we've seen a great support from the Americans. The European countries have been supporting Israel. I'm not sure it's going to stand as firm once we see the great devastation. And also, the biggest contention point is that Biden really wants to see some sort of plan for the future of Gaza. What is the end game after the war is over? Who will take over of Gaza? Who will take care of the 2.3 million Palestinians living there? Israel is very reluctant to discuss that. And maybe if it brings out a plan, it's going to be able to gain more time to have, to complete its military goals.
What about the families of the hostages that Gaza is holding, or rather that Hamas is holding in Gaza? Those families have been very vocal, very active. They've been pressuring the Israeli government too. Are they convinced about the Israeli government's priorities in this situation?
Well, for now, yes, but it's not clear what's going to be happening next. I think there's great consensus that the families, the young children and the mothers, the elderly women, they should be released. There's a fear that the war will not be resumed, or the attacks will not be resumed, the Israel military operation will cease. That's one fear. But then also at the same time, there's so many great dilemmas. I mean, bringing back the rest, there will be at least 180 left at the end of this if the ceasefire is extended. Bringing them back, most of them are soldiers by Hamas definitions. Even if you're not in active combat, Hamas is considering any male as a soldier. We've seen in the past the pressure to bring back the soldier on Israeli decision makers very, very strong. It's going to be hard for them to resist, and that will require very painful moves, but they're going to cost political support for Netanyahu. And today, unlike what he did in 2011 with the Shalit deal, his government is run by extreme right parties. It's going to be much harder for him to go for a deal that brings swaps of heavy terrorists sitting in Israel released against Israeli soldiers.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, you mentioned him and his government. His popularity is really low at this point. Polls show that many Israelis simply do not trust him anymore at this point. How much of his political career is staked on getting those hostages out?
A lot of it. I mean, it's clear, Israel has been debating within itself in the last 49 days what would be the moment, the victorious moment that they can take out. There's no doubt that without the hostages return, that's not going to happen. So that's a big part. But as long as the war is still ongoing, as long as there's active fighting, as long as there's so many soldiers drafted, I don't think we'll see a lot of movement in the political area. And once that is done, it's really hard to tell where Israel will find itself emotionally, psychologically, nationally. There's so many factors. It's clear that Israel is not like it was until October 7th. Things have shifted. Things have changed. The cards are still up in the air. We don't know exactly where they'll fall once everything is over.
Shani, thank you very much. That was our Middle East analyst, Shaarosanis. Now, as we've been discussing, some humanitarian aid trucks have been entering Gaza from Egypt. This is the scene live that you're looking at right now at the Rafah border crossing. Egypt says 130,000 liters of diesel and 4 trucks of natural gas will be delivered daily into Gaza, including 200 lorries of aid, boosting the amount of aid arriving at Gaza, which the UN and other agencies said is desperately needed in the territory. Now, let's bring in James Denzel here. He's head of the conflict and humanitarian policy at Save the Children UK, and he joins us from London. Thanks for being with us. Aid trucks are entering Gaza now. What do organizations like yours hope to achieve while this truce holds?
Well, Terry, we need to do so much, and inevitably we won't be able to do as much as we would want because of the restrictions, both bureaucratic, legal, political and physical in Gaza. I think your images of the Gaza crossing show, Rafah crossing show activity, but we've already got thousands of trucks backlogged. If you look at the average numbers of trucks that would have gone into Gaza, 500 a day prior to the horrendous events of October the 7th. So there's a massive backlog. Of course, we've had almost 50 days of complete carnage in Gaza that has had a huge impact on the population, 80% of whom were aid dependent prior to the events of October the 7th. We suspect that number is now up to 100%. And the most important and immediate things that they need are life-saving aid. So clean water, food, and shelter as the Gaza winter approaches.
Now, we've had weeks of bombardment and street fighting in Gaza. How much of a challenge is it going to be to move the big trucks full of aid around inside the Gaza territory, given that maybe the roads aren't even passable?
Yeah, it's such an important question. The devil is in the detail when it comes to aid logistics. And it is not just a case of what is the urban infrastructure in terms of where trucks can move, where aid workers can move. And let's not forget, Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker. Over 100 UN aid workers have been killed. So there is a question about where aid can get to. There's also a question about where it is most needed. And in particular, tens of thousands of Palestinians and children will remain in the north of Gaza. And there's huge question marks as to whether this humanitarian pause, this ceasefire, short ceasefire, will allow us to get to people in the north who have been under the most intense part of the military operations going on there. So where aid can get to is crucial, and who needs it the most is also incredibly important.
Talk to us about the needs of the people in Gaza. We know that it's a desperate humanitarian situation there. What do people in Gaza need most right now?
Well, the response needs everything. We'll obviously prioritize life-saving aid because that is what you do in these kind of situations. There's other aspects to an aid response that we don't talk about because they're so far off from being realized, such as the fact that Palestinian children in Gaza have had almost 7 weeks of no education. But we're obviously so focused on keeping people alive that is where attention lies, understandably. There is large numbers of Palestinian children who have suffered injury, often life-changing injury, losing limbs, being unable to walk again, having significant organ damage, huge question marks as to whether they can get the treatment they need from some of these new field hospitals in the south of Gaza, or whether they will need to have referral overseas or outside of Gaza. Then there's other aspects of care that we really need to think about. Child protection, there's large numbers of children who have been separated from their family. There's unfortunately large numbers of children who have lost their entire family, and reports coming in from hospitals of wounded children, no surviving relatives arriving at A&Es. So child protection services, nutrition services, water and sanitation in a part of the world where the water supply was already hugely contaminated. And if you do not get power, fuel and water back on, then you're back to issues around people drinking dirty water and waterborne diseases, whether that's from toilets or seawater, all sorts of stories that we're hearing. So the aid response is multifaceted. We will need weeks to even start to address the needs of over 2 million people in Gaza. Yet, of course, we only have a matter of days.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there, James. Thank you very much for talking with us. That was James Denzel from Save the Children.